Okay, everybody, how you guys doing? Hello, everyone. My name is Mark. This is Why I Hit the World, What's Happening. So let me just verify that our audio is looking good here because I was having some really horrible problems with audio. Let's just check that out real quick. Okay, fantastic. Sounds like it's sounding good. So sorry about that. I was going to start on time, and yeah, just had to knock out that little glitch there, but we should be good to go here. So, Lewis the Hedgehog, what's happening? Yes, today is the 20th anniversary of 9/11, which I should have, to be honest, this stream should all be about 9/11, but I figure that you'll probably be getting enough of that elsewhere out there in the world. There's probably going to be lots and lots of videos and things on TV and memorials and all that, all about 9/11. People who will be saying things and articulating things way better than I possibly could. So, um, yeah, so I figured today what I'm going to talk about is libertarianism and basically why I think it sucks. Right. So, why am I talking about this? Well, it's because mainly my streams are mostly about different kinds of you know right-wing sort of movements. That's kind of basically what my streams are about. You know, long story short, I talk. I've been, and plus we did kind of like a series exploring lots of different sorts of kinds of different right-wingers. We talked about the Ku Klux Klan. We talked about Christian identity. We talked about neo-fascist movements around World War II, and we talked about stuff like that, the militia movement, that kind of thing. And one of the places that a lot of these movements get their sort of intellectual underpinnings from are the libertarians. Right. Now, um, libertarianism in and of itself is not exclusively a right-wing movement in the United States. It is, well, I guess the thing is, you would ask, say, 10 libertarians, and you would of what libertarian is, and you would get 10 different answers, right? It's very much, not a monolith. There are lots of different types of libertarianism. There's lots of different little sub movements inside of it, stuff like that. You have things like, minarchists, right? You have like paleo libertarians. You have, anarcho-capitalists. You have lots of different movements within libertarianism, right? Some people who are essentially just Republicans that like to smoke weed and like abortion, and then other people who are just, straight up like don't want a state at all and would rather live, all of these kind of fall under the same general umbrella of libertarianism. Some of them who would even like accept a state and actually, believe that in state power, and there are even libertarians that support war, stuff like that, right? There are even libertarians that support the drug war. There's libertarians that support the police state. So it's not a very uniform political movement. It's more like a grouping of like-minded political movements, right? But there are things that they all tend to share. So one other thing that we should address is that in the United States, libertarians are generally mostly right-leaning, right? Now, the reason why I say that is because in the rest of the world, when the term libertarian usually refers to something that's a little more leftist, um, and that's what we would call in the United States left libertarianism or social libertarianism, right? And those are people that are anti-authority, yeah, anti-authoritarianism, and then also support, equality and equity between peoples, right? In the United States, you don't really see that very much. And it's not that they don't exist, because they do. There are left-leaning libertarians, there are social libertarians in the United States, but they seem to be very much a smaller part of the movement overall. They're not very well represented in, you would even say, the Libertarian Party. Not very much, right? The actual Libertarian Party of the United States also is somewhat right leaning, right? Um, although they generally tend to shy away from things like like authoritarian issues that they believe, things that they believe are authoritarian. To say that they were not, you know, overwhelmingly, I guess, influenced or controlled by the conservative wing of libertarianism is would be naive to say that, right? Because they are. They are. That's just the truth. In the United States, at least. In other countries around the world, they're a little more, leftist, right? But since I live in the USA, I'm talking mainly about politics in the United States. Uh, so you have lots of branches, but they all kind of tend to share the same. Tend to share like a general beliefs that are usually shared amongst all these groups. The number one thing being that they're very anti-authoritarian, right? At least in principle. In practice, maybe not so much, and we'll get to that a little later. But they are very much against state power. They're very much pro, and when it comes to that, though, the way that's translated is different depending on which little subgroup you belong to, right? Some of them will extend that all the way to things like, laws they don't like, that kind of thing. And some of those will extend that all the way to believing that police have no authority over you. That's when you get into like things like sovereign citizens and stuff like that, you know, um, which is also kind of an offshoot of libertarianism, right? The sovereign citizen movement. We actually did an entire stream on those guys too, some months back. Um, but they tend to believe basically that the government should not be able to enforce, that laws should be consented to, stuff like that. They don't really believe in, say, the social contract, right? And what do I mean by social contract? Because that's another thing that you would see lots of people have different answers about, like if you were to ask them what the social contract is. And what I'm referring to is the idea that the state gets its legitimacy through an agreement, like a sort of an unspoken agreement that you're supposed to obey the laws, you're supposed to pay your taxes and be a functioning member of society, and in exchange you get the benefits of living in said society, right? Um, what are those benefits? Things like education, police protection through the law, the idea that they're not going to just abandon you when there's a fucking, when there's a natural disaster, that you should be able to, rely on the authority to help you, provide for the general welfare, stuff like that. You're not gonna. There's a tornado and it destroys your entire like town, then FEMA's gonna show up and hand out bottled water, shit like that, right? That's the social contract, and then in exchange for that protection, you obey the law, you pay your taxes, you know, you you give up sovereignty over certain aspects of your life, but then the state also guarantees sovereignty in other aspects. That's kind of what I mean by social contract. Well, libertarians don't believe in that. They don't believe that the social contract exists. You'll often hear them say shit like that. It's an illusion, you know, etc., because they also have a very much a belief in self-reliance. This idea that that each man is an island, and self-reliance, and they believe that you should, for example, not rely on other people to save you, right? If there's a natural disaster, for example. Whereas some of us would say, hey, I pay my taxes. There's a, fucking forest fire that's about to burn down my house. Where the hell is the fire department? Right. The libertarian philosophy would say, well, you should have your own fire hoses and your own, fire axes and your own fucking, equipment, and you should protect your own house. Which, in some respects, that's true. It's like, yes, you should be prepared. You should be prepared. You should be able to defend yourself if somebody breaks into your house, for example. You should be able to take basic precautions if there's a disaster, if there's a fire, have a fire extinguisher, stuff like that. But in real life, it doesn't really work like that. Real life, there's situations where the individual cannot really handle disasters, and you can't really handle every single situation. A forest fire is a good example. That's why I'm using it, because there's nothing that you can do as an individual to stop a forest fire. It's not possible. You can't go out there by yourself with one little fire extinguisher and stop a raging forest fire from burning down your house. That's just not something that is possible, right? There's one of those situations where you do need to rely on other people. You need to rely on a social contract in order to protect your own property, right? Libertarians tend to not believe in that. Lusa Hedgehog, also in an anarcho-capitalist state who controls the nukes. Yeah, we'll come to that. We'll come to that. So, so they tend to believe in that stuff. Um, you know, they're very much in support of things like voluntary charities, that kind of thing. They tend to, not also they also, because of this emphasis on self-reliance, they don't like any kind of government assistance. Um, Government safety nets, things like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, programs that are designed to, address wealth inequity or inequality, I guess, um, you know, and that kind of thing, right? They would much rather have it be all voluntary, which sounds good in practice. It sounds like something like, well, in an ideal world, yes, it should be voluntary, right? In an ideal world, if everything was perfect and everybody was truly equal in their ability, then yes, you should be able to run a society like that, where if somebody really, really, really doesn't want to participate, they can opt out and everything would be cool. But in real life, doesn't really work that way. In real life, practical application, not really a viable solution, right? So we'll come to that. Um, they're also very much in support, in the United States at least, of free market capitalism. This idea of economic freedom is what they call that, right? And when they say economic freedom, they usually mean free market capitalism. And it's kind of a, they tend to be very anti-union usually. They also tend to be very much against government regulations. So when they talk about economic freedom, usually they mean, freedom to exploit people, freedom to pollute, right? Freedom for your business to, because that's what it comes down to. Because if you were to ask them, they would say, well, you should have the ability to, the way they rationalize this is they say, well, you should have the ability to engage in voluntary contracts, right? So anybody should have the ability to sign a contract with anybody else, right? And that includes if you want to work for a factory for, $3 a day or some shit like that. Well, you're the one that signed that contract. And so, if you didn't want it, then you wouldn't sign that contract. Well, once again, it doesn't really work out like that. very much. This completely kind of ignores the fact that people are not equal when economically, at least. You know, and because this is what you'll say, like the you'll hear this a lot from libertarians when it comes to things like minimum wage laws. They're very much against minimum wage laws, and you'll say, well, why? How come people? How come there shouldn't be a legally mandated minimum amount that you should have to pay people? Because that just seems like common sense. You shouldn't be able to pay somebody like a pittance and get their labor, right? And their response to that is, well, what if somebody wants to work for that little? You know, and they'll list things like jobs for children, essentially. They'll list things like, like teenagers and shit, right? Because also libertarians tend to also not really care so much about child labor laws as well, right? We'll come to that later. But, so they'll list that. They'll say, well, sometimes this is all the employer can pay. And if you take these low-paying jobs away, then the people that work them are not making any money, and it's up to them. And if they really wanted to make more money, they would negotiate better salaries with their employers. But it completely, once again, it's because they believe in this idea of, it's all up to the individual, right? Well, they kind of ignore the power dynamic when it comes from, say, the rich and the poor, right? The owner of the business and the employee, the job. So you go, like, I mean, seriously, like, go try to get a job for minimum wage and then try to, negotiate a higher salary, like when you're working at Taco Bell or some shit like that, like, seriously, try to go get like a job at McDonald's or Taco Bell or fucking, Hardee's or whatever part of the, Carl's Jr. is what it is out here, right? I don't know if you're on the East Coast, it's Hardee's. Whatever, right? Try to get a job at one of these places and say, like, I want to renegotiate my salary. And they'll just, like, renegotiate your ass right out the door because, you don't have the same advantage that your boss or the giant corporation you work for does. And there's a million other people out there that will do the same work you're doing for the same pay. And if you don't like it, then, too fucking bad. And that's what it's like in real life. And it's funny because you would say that, they tend to, they say this, they say you should be able to negotiate, but they also don't like labor unions because to them, a labor union is like collectivist action. And you also find lots of anti sort of communist, anti-socialist type people when it comes to libertarians as well, right? So it's very much kind of a contradictory, when it all comes down to it, it's very much contradictory in its outcomes. The things that they want versus like the actual effects of the policies that they support. Oftentimes doesn't really make a lot of sense. But this is politics we're talking about, and people really often talk out of their ass a lot when it comes to politics. So, anyway, but yeah, they are very much overwhelmingly in the United States pro free market capitalism. Very much anti-regulations of any kind, whether that's labor regulations, whether that's environmental regulations, pollution, carbon emissions, stuff like that. In general, they're very much against any kind of governmental programs. And this can, run the gamut as well. There are some libertarians who will accept things like Social Security and stuff like that, but the majority of them don't like it. The majority of them have this notion in their heads that it's like, well, if I had this money, I could invest it better, whatever, blah blah blah, whatever, right? It's bullshit, but whatever. That's what they believe. And then you have, you know, the reason why they don't like all this stuff, why they don't believe in the social contract, why they tend to not believe in government regulations or social safety nets, stuff like that, is because they are very, 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 very much against taxation. And this is another thing that practically every single uh, little subgroup that would classify itself as libertarian. This is one thing that they all agree with. They all really hate taxes. And a lot of libertarian thought and rationalization is basically them trying to come up with schemes in order to not pay taxes, right? A lot of it, a lot of how they would propose like their societies, how the policies they support, all of it, when it really comes down to it, is a way that how can we run things without having to pay taxes? Let's make everything voluntary. So this is why you get things like they talk about voluntary, professional voluntary police forces, where you don't have to actually obey the laws if you don't pay for it, you know, or you don't get the police protection unless you pay for it voluntarily, and then also voluntary fire service as well. It goes all the way down there. So because you would think like one way that they start, because that's kind of not practical at this point of time in society to say a voluntary police force, right? But they will advocate for things like for-profit education. That's one example of where libertarian political parties and movements and things are very much are advocates for privatized education. They want to get rid of public education. They think everybody should have to pay to go to a private school or something like that, or that it should be run by a corporation, shit like that. Brainbug, thanks for joining. How you doing? Right. Very much in favor of all that. And because they don't want to pay taxes. Because that's, and then, but then some of them will say like medicine as well. They're very much against socialized medicine, the types of government-run insurance programs that they have in, say, Canada or the UK or Europe, where places elsewhere in the in the world where if you get sick, you can just go to a hospital and not have to worry about taking out another mortgage on your house. They're very much against shit like that because they don't want to pay taxes, not because of the outcome. See, that's the thing. It has nothing to do with the outcome, right? So you can sit here and you can try to, debate libertarians, right, on issues like these, and you can post stats, you can show like, hey, in these other countries they spend less on like, say, just taking healthcare for an example. They spend less on healthcare than we do. They have better outcomes. The people there are generally more healthy. They live longer. They have less problems. Things like sudden infant death syndrome, shit like that, is smaller in these countries with universal health care. They have less people dying from pandemics. That's another thing. Stuff like that. You can argue all that shit till you're blue in the face. It's not going to matter because their stance on it is that it should be voluntary. That's their stance, and they don't want to pay taxes on anything because, according to them, taxes are not voluntary, and since they're not voluntary, they're the same thing as theft. So if you ever hear that bullshit when libertarians and other sort of right-wingers will say things like taxation is theft, that's where all this comes from. It comes from the idea that taxation is not voluntary, right? Which, of course, it is not voluntary, because it wouldn't be called taxation if it was voluntary. It'd be called donations, right? But, it's not theft either. Taxation is not theft, right? We can talk about that. I've done maybe fucking 100 videos on that in the past. Taxation is not theft. It's taxation. Theft is a crime. It's against the law, right? Well, so can you say, for example, like, let's say, taxation is not against the law. The taxation is a law. Taxation is informed through legislation, right? You can repeal taxes. You can elect somebody that will be a politician. You can elect a politician that will go and write a new law that repeals a certain tax, right? Can you repeal thievery? Doesn't work that way. You make thievery against the law. Is that going to stop thievery? No. But you can stop collecting taxes. You could conceivably elect someone that gets rid of all taxes if you wanted. I mean, that's possible. It's not like it'll ever happen, but it is, conceivably possible. Somebody could, you know, I don't know, fucking pass a fucking law that destroys the country and gets rid of all taxes, right? Could you do that to thievery? Can you just make thievery against the law? You know, I mean, if it isn't already, of course it is. And can you just be like, hey, that's it, no more thievery, that's it. And then somebody tries to rob you, and you be like, hey, man, you can't do that. We repealed thievery. Doesn't work that way. You know, another thing where taxation is not thievery is that you can, for example, certain people are taxed differently depending on their income levels. That's another thing. Well, you know, if somebody robs you in an alley, can you be like, hey, my friend here makes more money than me, so you should steal more from him. But me, I make under the federal poverty line, so that means I don't get stolen from because that's, you know, right? Does it work like that? No, that's not how it works. It's a dumb analogy, is what it is. The taxation is thievery is a dumb analogy, and the reason they say it is because it's not voluntary. They go like, well, if it's not voluntary, that means if I don't choose to do it, if I don't choose to pay my taxes, then the government is going to send men with guns to arrest me. And then if you know, they're going to send men with guns to arrest me. And then if I don't go along with it, I could conceivably get shot and killed, and they're going to take the money anyway. So that's why it's thievery. Sorry, but that's bullshit. You know, it's not automatically thievery just because it's not voluntary. There's so many other factors involved, and it's basically that's a really dumb shit analogy in my opinion. You know, and you know, it's not like everybody loves taxation. It's not like, I mean, me myself personally, you know, it's not like I think taxes are like the best things ever, whatever. But what they are a necessary part of society that you need if you're going to have any kind of functioning government with actual policies that work and help people, then you need funding. And that's where taxation comes in. So this is, you know, this is where that shit comes from, right? It all comes like all of, essentially a lot of libertarian thought in the United States all kind of comes down to the idea that, you know, they don't want to pay taxes. And so they rationalize lots of different things, and it's all kind of bullshit. Let's see. What else? What else? What else? We're going over that. Social contract, individual responsibility. Yeah, that's another thing. Very much. They tend to believe that in individual responsibility, that the individual is solely responsible for their own life and their own condition. I don't like that. What is that? How come I can't get rid of that? Oh, okay. That's on that layer. So, right. And because of that, they tend to not believe in things like, say, they tend to, you know, um, diminish the importance of things like, say, institutional racism. They really don't believe in that, you know, and the effects of say, like, you know, power dynamics between rich and poor people, that kind of thing. They tend to downplay all this because their philosophy says that everybody has equal ability, you know, everybody has equal ability. So that's why, like, you know, they believe that you should be able to sign any contract that you want because everybody has equal ability. Well, in real life, everybody doesn't really have equal ability. Not really. Nobody really is truly equal in real life. It's the law that makes us equal, right? In real life, people are smarter than other people. You know, some people are way smarter, more educated. Some people are physically more adept than other people. That's just how it is, you know. I myself, for example, will never be an NBA basketball star. You know, I will never play for the NFL. I will never probably ever even be able to, like, you know, I don't know, golf in the US Open. Like, I'm not an athlete. There are other people out there that through either training, years of training, or just natural ability are just better at me than those things. Right. But I bet, you know, there are also people that I can draw way better than right? You know, that's my talent. My talent is doing artwork and shit like this, right? And there are other people that can draw 10 times better than I can. You know, this is just how real life is. In real life, people are not equal. But what it is, it's the law. It's the law that makes us equal, right? You're equal before the law. So that means that just because of any intrinsic talent or protected class that you may have, that doesn't mean the law should treat you differently than somebody else. So it doesn't matter if you're rich or you're poor, if you're strong or you're weak, if you have polio, or if you're a fucking Olympic level athlete. The law says everybody's the same, and punishments and rewards from the, when based in the law, should apply to everybody equally. That's what we mean when we say all men were born equal. When all citizens of the United States are equal. That's what we're talking about, right? Libertarians don't really understand that. They kind of take that to mean that everybody is on equal footing in every situation, so that you can negotiate a contract equally with a giant mega corporation that holds all the cards, right? You know, I mean, and it doesn't really work like that in real life. Like try to buy a house, go buy a house, and then when you get the contract for your home loan, go through the contract and cross out all the shit you don't like. They call that, do a red line on all the things you don't like in your contract. Okay, I don't like this. I don't want to pay that. I don't want to pay this insurance. I don't want to pay these. And then bring that back to your bank and be like, okay, here are the terms I want for this home loan. Watch how fast they laugh you out of the fucking bank, right? It doesn't work like that in real life. It's like, no, you take our fucking terms or you don't get it, because they hold all the keys. They hold all the power. Now, if you were super rich and powerful, if you were, say, for example, I don't know, Paris Hilton or Donald Trump or fucking, some other super rich billionaire, right? And you were doing a business deal like this, say you're buying a building or buying a house or something like that, you can set the terms all you want because you hold the fucking power. And the bank wants your money, and it's different. So it's like, this is the reality. Libertarians tend to ignore that reality because they think that you are, in the same position as a super rich billionaire oligarch when it comes to negotiating your salary. When it comes to negotiating your terms for your home loan, or when it comes to pollution even. It's like, I've even had conversations in the past with libertarian people talking about, say, pollution, stuff like that, and they'll be like, well, get your own water source. I remember this. I remember saying, hey, there was a few years back, there was a news story about a company that was dumping toxic waste into a fucking river, right? And I was arguing about this with a libertarian guy, and he basically said, yeah, well, you can sue the company. And I'm like, yeah, well, how the fuck are you going to sue the company for dumping water in the, first off, the water doesn't fucking belong to you, right? So you can't really sue. Secondly, they have, millions and millions of dollars and lawyers, and there's no way that you'll possibly win because they'll just stretch it out forever and ever and ever. And it was like, his solution was like, just take them to court. Tort reform, blah, blah, blah. That's a very libertarian solution for, I guess I would say libertarian non-solution for a problem. Just use the power of the courts and things to sue people into not polluting, right? To sue people into not making, harmful products that destroy the environment, into not spewing carbon that melts the fucking, ice caps. Right. Yeah, like I could go to like BP and be like, hey, you guys are like, you're fucking oil spill. I'm just gonna sue you, and then you'll have to like stop drilling in the fucking Gulf of Mexico. Like that's gonna work. It's bullshit. It's basically a fucking non-solution, right? But this is how they would propose we approach those things, because the logical way of putting government regulations, regulating it so BP can't spill their fucking, so they have to like have safety features and shit so a hurricane doesn't come and destroy their fucking oil well and spill toxic waste all over the place, which is happening right now in the Gulf because of that hurricane that just happened. That's the kind of the untold story of this latest hurricane, is massive oil spills happening in the Gulf right now. That's that's besides the point. That's a story for another stream. The world is fucked. Anyway, but that's their solution, when in real life it's not practical. It's a non-solution. It might be practical if another fucking giant super rich corporation with billions of dollars went and sued BP. But even then, it's not like they can sue them and to stop doing it. All they'll do is just get money. In the meantime, BP continues to pollute, destroy the environment in the Gulf, and destroy the livelihoods of fishermen and stuff like that, and by extension, the quality of life for millions of fucking people. Not to mention all the sea life, which is like on the verge of fucking extinction out there. But hell no, we can't have the one entity that could go in and actually put an end to all this shit being the government. Can't have that because that's tyranny. It's tyranny to have a regulation that says you're not allowed to spill your toxic fucking shit straight into the ocean. You know, this is the libertarian mindset that we're talking about here. One other thing that most libertarian groups tend to also agree on is they tend to be anti-war, right? So this is, the thing is, it's not all bad. This is a good thing. Libertarians are traditionally anti-war. Although that also isn't 100%. There are very much libertarian groups, libertarian movements, and things like that that are very much pro-war. And you would think like, hey, that's kind of the antithesis of what being a libertarian should be about, right? You would think of the one thing that, a political movement which is anti-authoritarian, you would think the one thing that they could all agree on is that, hey, invading other countries, wars for imperialism, wars for oil, shit like that, war in general would be a bad thing, right? But not necessarily. You got to remember, this is the United States we're talking about, and one thing that happens in the United States is that nobody ever really agrees with everybody else, ever. That's kind of what being an American is all about. So you have lots of libertarian groups, libertarian movements, which are actually kind of pro-war sometimes, right? And this is the one thing that I get a lot of shit on for saying. I get a lot of shit from people for saying this. I made a video about a decade ago, one of my early videos called "People Who Piss Me Off, Libertarians." And it's probably my most popular video. It's got something like fucking, I don't know, a lot, thousands and thousands of hits on it, right? Which is a lot for me because my videos usually get something like fucking 100 if I'm lucky, right? So, you know. And one thing I said in that video, because when I wrote that video, it was God, 2008, I think. It was a long time ago, and I basically called libertarians out for supporting the military-industrial complex. And to this day, I still get mail from people, I still get comments from people giving me a mountain of shit because I said that. But in real life, it's true. There are, conservative libertarian groups which are very much pro-war. And they were pro-war back then, and they are today. This is very much a thing. It was so much so that during the, let me just open up this link here so I can show to you guys. During the Iraq War, there was like lots of, debate within libertarian circles. So here's an article from The Atlantic from 2007, right? Let me just go ahead and put the link down in the chat here. This is from The Atlantic in 2007, talking about pro-war libertarians and why there were so many libertarians who supported the Iraq War. I'm not going to read too much into this, but you can check it out on your own if you guys want. It's actually a pretty good read. One of the rationales that particular article gives is because the threat of Islamic terrorism, right? The thing is, it's not like it started with the Iraq War or 9/11. There was already like kind of a large segment of the libertarian movement which were already pro-military, pro-war. You ever notice how many libertarians actually come out of the military? There'll be veterans, stuff like that. So many people in libertarian groups will claim to be veterans, and they'll say, I served 2 tours in Iraq, shit like that. Well, if you're a fucking libertarian, why are you joining the army in the first place? Right? Like, and it's very much, it's because, it's not so much about ideology. like anything else, being a libertarian is not so much about an ideology, it's more about culture, right? And a lot of libertarians arrive at their beliefs through conservative culture in the United States, and conservatives in general are very much pro-military. You know, they're very, this idea that I should serve my country, blah, 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 and they don't really mind going out and blowing up brown people here and there. That's kind of the unspoken motivation behind conservatives joining the military a lot. We could make probably an entire stream about that. So, yeah, so it's like, yeah, for the most part, they'll claim on the outside to be very anti-military, anti-military industrial complex, shit like that, and they'll cite things like because mainly they have to use taxes in order to pay for a military, so that's why they don't like the military. But in practice, in real life, maybe not so much. Maybe there actually does seem to be a lot of support for the military in libertarian circles, and that's just a fact. So anyway, yeah, let's see here. We talked about that. So basically, the majority of libertarian groups and just libertarians in general in the United States tend to be very, very conservative. And they're essentially, I've heard it described that they're conservatives that want to smoke marijuana and, support abortion sometimes. Mainly when it comes to them getting a girl pregnant, they support abortion, but not for everybody else. When it comes to everybody else getting abortions, they don't like it. That's kind of what I've heard it described as in the United States. They're right-wing hippies is another way. That's how Ayn Rand described libertarians, and we'll talk about Ayn Rand later. I'm actually thinking of doing an entire stream all about objectivism, because that, in and of itself, is a subject which we could go on for like 2 hours about. Objectivism is actually an offshoot of libertarianism. Of course, Ayn Rand really didn't like libertarians, very much at all. She called them, like I just said, right-wing hippies and thought they were misguided, blah, 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 blah. And it's because basically Ayn Rand didn't like libertarians because she's kind of like the vilest of the vile. And libertarians at that time, where she was alive and shit, weren't really as vile as she was, essentially. Like, they still believed in things like, I don't know, a minimum of a working government. And Ayn Rand just wanted to, like, get rid of, like, all the government, right? Like, everything. And so she was more insane than they were. Of course, nowadays, the modern libertarians are very much closer to what Ayn Rand was at. So, if Ayn Rand were alive today, she might not be calling them names. Anyway, let's see. So here I have something. I've showed this in a video before, but it kind of illustrates my point a little bit. Let me just find this link here. I'm kind of jumping around a lot. Where is this? I have this link here from, here it is. This is from the Cato Institute. So the Cato Institute is a libertarian think tank, right? They're one of those groups that will come up with the rationalizations in order to, like, support policies that pollute and exploit people, shit like that. This is the results from the 2016 Post-Libertarian versus Conservatism debate survey. So let me go ahead and put this down in the chat for you guys also. Most of this is bullshit, I wouldn't recommend reading any of this, but here's one thing, this chart I wanted to show to you guys. And what this chart is, and this is, 2016, so it's still mostly current. This shows the level of concern for different issues according to what libertarians believe and what conservatives believe. So let me go ahead and just make this a little bigger for you guys. There we go. So you can see how concerned are you about the following issues, right? Now you can kind of see here where usual conservatives and libertarians match up, right? If you look at the bottom, all of this stuff is mostly down here at the bottom, government policies, right? Free trade, regulations of business, size and scope of government, healthcare, taxes, economy, government spending, education, right? Drug use even. So it is very, very close, their level of concern and their beliefs about these things are very, very close. And it only really starts to diverge, right, when you get to these social issues up here. So basically, the closer you are to the center here, the less concern you have, and the less authoritarian your positions will be about it. So you can see here, they don't really give a shit about morality in society, right? So they don't have a lot of concern about that. So, for example, you won't get libertarians say, like, morality in society is something like premarital sex, right? Or pornography. That's what they mean by morality in society, right? So they don't give a shit about that. Libertarians tend to think, yeah, pornography's fine. You should be able to do it all you want. They tend to not care about premarital sex. In fact, and we could do an entire stream about libertarians and the age of consent. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Right. So they don't care about, but conservatives do. Conservatives are very concerned about these things. Immigration. See, you can see it's almost pretty close on immigration. So you would think, also being a libertarian, you think you'd support the idea that the free movement of people across borders, the same way that capital can move across borders. You think that would be something they support, but not really. They're kind of concerned about it. They're not really concerned. I mean, abortion is another one that you tend to have more people who call themselves libertarians support abortion, but you notice that's not all the way in the center. If we were looking at a liberal progressive thing, abortion would be way down here, right? So it's usually kind of like what I said, like they think abortion should be a state by state thing, and most of them that support it because they'll say, well, there shouldn't be a federal law against abortion; it should be a state law. And because don't get me, let's not mistake ourselves. There is a very, very large support amongst libertarians for abortion. There is, it's just they don't. It's the way in which they want to outlaw it. Terrorism, national security, government surveillance, they care more about that than conservatives do. They care more. So when it comes to these things, these are sort of like, government overreach kind of things, right? So you can see the normal conservatives are much more authoritarian when it comes to things like the criminal justice system. When it comes to government surveillance, Republicans, conservatives don't give a shit about that. They don't care if the government is watching you 24/7. Libertarians don't like that. They want to be able to masturbate in peace and not have Uncle Sam looking over their shoulder with a fucking fly drone or whatever. But you can kind of see it starts to sort of match up again. Racial inequality, not drug. I think this one is drug prohibition. Starts to get a little bit more narrow when it comes to things like racial inequality, the environment, income inequality. They start to match up again. So you can see on social issues, they're mostly pretty close. It's just really when it comes to these things that they talk about government overreach. But down here, when you talk about all these things, government spending, economy, jobs, taxes, they essentially spot on. They're very close to each other. So I think it's actually very telling to kind of see, the areas where they match and the areas where they don't. And you can set it like that criticism that libertarians are essentially conservatives that want to smoke weed and cheat on their wives with underage girls is pretty much accurate. Right? It fucking is, dude. That's just what it is. So anyway, that's interesting shit. I thought that was interesting. Let's see. So, a little bit about the history. I mean, I don't want to talk too much about the history of libertarians in the United States. I mean, it essentially started in the early 20th century and didn't really get going until a guy named Murray Rothbard kind of became the de facto leader of the libertarian movement. This guy, Rothbard himself, is very much a character. He is all like politically kind of all over the place. In the 1950s, he was a staunch conservative, and then he became loosely affiliated with Ayn Rand for a little while. And then by the 60s, he actually became a little bit of a liberal person, right? And he did some work with the nuclear, or actually the nuclear disarmament movement back in the 60s, right? Which I wish still existed, but it kind of doesn't. You know, worked with those guys for a little bit, and then, with the New Left. And then by the 80s and 90s, or the 70s and 80s, he kind of took a hard turn left, or hard turn right, excuse me. And that's when libertarianism became, essentially what it is today, because of, Murray Rothbard, right? He was, very much, I guess you would call, I mean, if not the leader, one of the, you know, foremost intellectual leaders of the libertarian movement, right? And under him in the 70s and 80s, the Libertarian Party essentially just became a mouthpiece for big business, right? And that's definitely one thing that they're at now, especially big businesses and in particular Koch Industries. You guys, I'm sure you have all heard of you know, what are they called? Charles and the other guy, Koch. Those two guys. One of them's dead now, right? Um, Koch Industries kind of bankrolled a lot of um, kind of astroturf movements that are loosely associated with libertarians and libertarianism. You know, lots of phony baloney think tanks, that kind of thing, that go around and just like, you know, advocate, like basically just lobbyist groups that go around and advocate for libertarian positions on lots of, policies and stuff like that, right? The Koch brothers, for you guys who don't know, are basically fossil fuel billionaires, in particular coal, but also oil as well, right? And they have their fingers into a lot of different things, all the way you know, down to commercial products that you would buy in a store, things like brawny paper towels, for example. You know, at one point was owned by Koch Industries, if they still aren't today, right? So, and they kind of got into this. They basically used the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian movement to kind of promote their pro-pollution, anti-government regulation policies, right? All throughout the 70s and 80s, and that's actually a thing that's still going on right now. Um, they found, for example, the Cato Institute, where that graph that I just posted, that was funded by the Koch brothers in the beginning. If they still aren't nowadays, that's where they came from. They were founded by the Koch brothers. Another group that was called Citizens for the Sound Economy, that split off into two groups. One's called Americans for Prosperity, which is a kind of Tea Party astroturf group, and then another one called Freedom Works, which is another sort of Tea Party group, which is still around. Freedom Works was started by a guy named Dick Armey. They're still very much a big player, and they'll do things like they'll go around. Freedom Works, they'll go around and they'll have rallies, back before Trump was on the scene. They were even active, back then. Nowadays, they're very much a pro-Trump kind of group, and they go out and they have rallies. They go to colleges and like sponsor speakers. Like they'll do things like they'll sponsor like Milo Yiannopoulos and shit to go like speak at a college, stuff like that, so that they can promote pro white wing stances, right? And a lot of it has to do with them kind of sneaking in support for policies that allow, the Koch brothers to get away with polluting and exploiting people. Lots of anti-environmentalism things, lots of climate change denial. They'll for example, like another guy is a guy named Christopher Monckton. He's a British phony baloney pseudoscientist in Britain that goes on TV and tries to convince people that global climate change is like a Chinese hoax and shit like that. They'll support guys like that, and they'll put on they'll pay for debates and things and be like, hey, this guy should debate fucking Neil deGrasse Tyson on that kind of thing. So um, another thing that the Citizens for Prosperity supported was smokers' rights. Right. That was another thing. Very much in the 70s, the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when they first figured out that cigarettes cause cancer, there was a major, major, major backlash against that. And it kind of mirrored what we're seeing today, like the same way that a group like, say, Freedom Works, or another group is called the Heritage Foundation, or George Mason University. Those are other two groups. Like the same way that they'll put out fake papers with phony science saying that the global warming is not a thing. They used to do that back in the day when it came to cigarettes, and they would say like, oh, you can smoke all you want and it's bad, and here's the real science behind cigarettes, and it doesn't kill you, blah blah blah. In the meantime, fucking 5,000 people a day are dying of lung cancer and shit like that. Right. So it was very much, the same kind of model. We've experienced this before. You know what I mean? So whenever you get these sort of astroturf groups pushing fake ass pseudoscience, just remember these are the same people that tried to shield the tobacco companies, and it's very much like this, like the tobacco, like the Koch brothers do the same thing that the tobacco companies used to do back then, and this is what they would do, right? They would set up a fake, scientific journal, the tobacco companies, right? They'd set up a phony ass scientific journal that would publish, and then it would go around and then it would publish like legitimate science, right? Papers by legitimate scientists. And then they would have their like government funded, or not government funded, but privately funded scientists tell everybody that smoking wasn't bad, and then they would publish it in their journal, right? And they would be like, see, this scientist here says smoking's not bad for you, and he's in this esteemed peer-reviewed journal. When in real life, it's like shit that they paid for to begin with, right? And it was all to win the PR campaign, so that people will basically have an excuse to, continue smoking. Well, hey, this scientist says it's not bad for me. I'm gonna go light up, you know. And please keep in mind, please keep in mind that I smoked for like, maybe 11 years, 12 years, way longer than I should have. So this is coming from an ex-smoker here, you know. So it's not like I have skin in this game here. It's not like I'm like a fucking anti-smoking advocate, I used to smoke I used to smoke fucking a pack a day. Shit. It's actually been what? When did I quit smoking? 2007 was when I quit smoking. Kind of a long time ago, so I'm feeling pretty good now, Hoping that all the damage I did to my lungs has been reversed by now. I don't know. They say that if you quit smoking after a decade, then your body is kind of back to how it was. I'm hoping that's true. Anyway, getting back to the subject at hand here. Sorry, going off on tangents. Another thing that they tend to oppose is network neutrality, right? So yeah, you don't get a lot of because it's a government regulation. So they oppose network neutrality. They tend to ignore or downplay the existence of sexual harassment in the workplace. You know, because it doesn't fit in with their philosophy. Their philosophy that everybody has equal ability and equal power, stuff like that. So they kind of see sexual harassment as an excuse. It's like, oh, the damn feminists are trying to use this as an excuse as to why they don't excel, you know. And plus, if you don't like it, just quit. That tends to be the response when it comes to, what do you do about sexual harassment? Of course, this ignores the fact, once again, it ignores power dynamics, right? It ignores the fact that it's not that easy to just quit a job. You can't just quit. Sometimes you don't have a choice. Sometimes you have bills to pay. Sometimes the area you live in, there aren't any other jobs that pay the same amount, and it can really fuck you up. Sometimes if you quit, this is the only industry in your town that, you end up getting blacklisted, and then you end up learning, if you do get a job, it'll be like making way less than what you're at. And besides the fact that it just shouldn't be allowed in the fucking first place. What kind of country do you want to live in where your boss can, like, demand a fucking blowjob from you or some shit? That's not part of your job, right? What kind of shit is that? It's like, but they ignore all of this stuff because it doesn't match up with their philosophy. And the real reason they ignore it is because libertarians tend to be misogynistic and very much anti-feminist, to begin with. That's the real reason why they belittle all this shit. I have to turn the fan on because it's hot as fuck in here, so if you hear a fan in the background, I apologize in advance. But I'm like roasting alive in here. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, just in general, libertarians in the United States also tend to be very anti-woke, anti-feminist, anti just woke culture. They're very much on the side of the chuds and the conservatives and shit in the culture war, you know. And it's yeah, and you would think, because that kind of sounds like another thing that would be exactly against their philosophy. You would think that if your philosophy said, do whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt me, then they would be very much in favor of trans rights, of gay rights, of things like gay marriage, of you know gay people adopting children, that kind of thing. And you would think that they would be very much in favor of people being treated equally when it comes to these sorts of things. For example, you know, the ability for trans people to serve in the military, stuff like that, gay marriage, that kind of thing. And they just really aren't. Not really. Not in reality. And once again, you'll probably find lots of libertarians who will come out in support of these things. But as a general rule, as a whole, they really aren't. You know, they very much line up with conservatives when it comes to this sort of these sorts of issues. You know. Um, so why is this? Why, because what I'm trying to get at is that there seems to be an excessive amount of just crazy people, of right-wing wackaloons, and all this stuff. I see there's a lot of comments. Keep commenting, guys. I'm going to read all of them. We'll talk about at the end of the stream, as always, we'll talk about comments. But you tend to find lots of just cranks and just nutcases and wackaloons and bizarre people of all stripes who tend to gravitate towards the Libertarian Party. Why is that, right? Lots of, well, first off, it's because of the anti-authoritarianism angle, right? So that tends to attract the idea that they're very much, against oversight. They're very much against, an intrusive government that, say, for example, polices speech. They're very supposedly pro free speech. At least that's what they claim. When, in my practical experience, I would say they're not pro free speech. But this is the official, kind of thing that they all espouse, is that we're very pro free speech. You can say whatever you want. That kind of usually attracts people with extreme things to say, because everywhere else, for example, if you're a flaming hardcore racist, every space you go on, every website, every Every other place like that you go on online will kick you out because they don't want to associate with your ass. Well, you tend to gravitate towards the place that will not regulate you, that will not moderate you, right? And that's why you get, first off, a lot of people, just in general, whenever you have these sort of like, you ever notice that? You ever go on a website or something like a forum or anything like that, or say like a subreddit or whatever, where they talk about, this is all free speech. Like there's another one, like there's a Twitter clone called Getter, like a right-wing Twitter clone, and they're they staunchly support free speech, and that's where all the fucking racists and white supremacists go, right? You ever notice that? And it's because, well, it's because that's where fucking that's where people will go where everywhere else they go on the internet they get kicked out. That's a perfect example right there. So they all show up, so they tend to claim to be libertarians because libertarians are the only people that'll put up with their bullshit. Right. Get a lot of those guys, so that tends to attract lots of anti-government types, lots of people like, say, fucking the, Cliven Bundy, those kinds of sovereign citizen types. Lots of, people are, tax, since the stance, the libertarian stance, like anti-tax stance brings a lot of like, like tax, anti-tax activists, things like that, who, that might be their only issue, and they don't really seem to give a shit very much about the other libertarian stances, but they really hate taxes, right? Um, Lots of Second Amendment people. Libertarians tend to be very, very pro Second Amendment. So, to the point where I think the shit's detrimental. So you get lots of gun nuts in there. Gun nuts tend to also be like, very, very conservative, somewhat racist, right? Very anti woke, anti anti feminist, right? Against gay rights. You tend to get a lot of that when it comes to Second Amendment people as well. Um, Lots of MRM, men's rights activists, red pill assholes tend to identify as libertarian as well. I think a lot of that has to also do with the fact that the shit that they say is vile, vile fucking um, speech that other places, other people don't put up with, but libertarians do, so that's why they call themselves libertarian. I think a lot of that has to do with why so many fucking cranks show up and tend to be libertarians, you know? Lots of just anti-feminist people in general, and it's because, they're conservatives, really, and that's why. These are all very conservative stances on things, and that just makes perfect sense, It's like the conservatives who are pro-gun and all that shit, they're gonna come along and they're gonna bring all of their toxic fucking shit with them, right? Um, you also tend to get a lot of religious freaks as well, right? A lot of Jesus freaks, a lot of fucking evangelical, the end of the world is fucking coming kind of people tend to also be libertarian. And it's because these people also tend to, I hate to keep repeating myself, but they also tend to be highly conservative and believe in all these other things as well that conservatives believe in. All of the bigoted prejudices that normal conservatives have tend to come from, religious people also. And you have also an overlap with the prepper community as well. Lots of preppers, people preparing for the end of the world, also tend to be highly religious also. So and they tend to overlap with gun nuts too. So these are the people like saving up fucking 3 decades worth of like, rice and corn and shit, waiting for Jesus to come back and like, I don't know, outlaw abortion or something, right? That's another, these people also tend to be very much in support of libertarian ideals, the Libertarian Party in general, right? And I want to make a distinction because I'm not specifically talking about the Libertarian political party. They're very much kind of very much more officially their stances will line up with, what we would say are libertarian ideals. They tend to. I'm talking mainly more about in practice, right? What the people that believe in these things actually do and say and actually believe. The adherents. What are their actual true beliefs? What are the policies that they actually support? How do they vote? You know, the majority of libertarians in the country do not vote for the Libertarian Party. They don't. They vote for Republicans. You know, people like Ron Paul libertarians and shit. And they'll describe themselves as libertarians, but they'll vote for Republicans because they don't think the Libertarian Party in and of itself is viable, because it isn't, right? You know, um, so that's mainly what I'm talking about here. You know, uh, one disturbing thing we're seeing a lot here is also a lot of vaccine people, anti-vax, anti-mask people nowadays because of our, pandemic that won't end. A lot of these people tend to also be libertarians, which is really fucked up. The official stance of the Libertarian Party is an anti-vax, anti-mask party. Um, I'm sure you guys have all heard about. Let me see. I think I got a link here. This is the Libertarians Party's reaction to Biden's 6-point COVID-19 mitigation plan. I'm not going to open that up, but I'll put that in the chat there for you guys. Essentially boils down to we're not going to do it in so many words, right? Because they see it as a government overreach, and also because of the fact that they know that if they actually supported it, then their adherents are going to start jumping ship and they're going to start leaving the party, right? Because it's filled with fucking cranks, lots of alternative medicine freaks. And those kinds of people also tend to be libertarians as well. So lots of the people that are out there taking fucking horse dewormer, and like fucking fishbowl cleaner and all this other bullshit that doesn't stop viruses. A lot of those people are also identify themselves as libertarian, right? So this is why, but I mean, I guess it does line up with their ideology. According to them, the government shouldn't force you to take a vaccine. You should just be free to choose whether or not you want to die screaming in a, not screaming, die suffocating in a fucking hospital bed, Of course, like everything else, they're forgetting the fact that their actions affect other people, I guess it's fine when it comes to a firearm. Okay, you can wave your firearm around as long as you don't shoot me with it. Doesn't really work that way when you're talking about a vaccine. It's like, well, you know, yeah, you should be maybe, we shouldn't force you to get it, but what about all the 20 or 40 fucking people that you infect while you're running around without your vaccine or without a mask on? What about all those other people? It's like that is actually causing people harm. So according to your own fucking philosophy, we should be allowed to mandate that you take basic fucking precautions in certain situations. I don't know if you guys heard about, Joe Biden's executive orders there, which I actually applaud him for. It's about fucking time. Basically, what Joe Biden said was that, kind of go off on a little bit of a tangent here. Basically, what Joe Biden said was that, if you want to work for the United States government, you have to be vaccinated. And then also, we're going to start enforcing a vaccine, mandate for large employers if you have more than 100 people or something like that. And then you can choose to not get it, but then you have to be tested weekly, right? Good. It's about fucking time. They should have done this shit last year. They should have done this as soon as the vaccine became available. It's like, get the fucking vaccine. And if not, then, okay, you're going to be tested because if you're not vaccinated, then you're spreading this shit around. You could be potentially putting other people in danger. I see nothing wrong with that whatsoever. I'm very, very supportive of Joe Biden's move to do this. It's fantastic. And keep in mind, there are people who can't get vaccinated. That's the thing. There are people who cannot get vaccinated. There are people who have, um, you know, autoimmune uh, problems who cannot get vaccinated. There are people who will be allergic to it, shit like that. There are people who are already sick that if they get a vaccine, the doctor says not to do it. That's fine, but if you're going to work in a public space with people where you could potentially be spreading a fucking lethal virus, then yeah, maybe you require them to get tested every X number of days. Maybe it doesn't have to be every week. Maybe it should be every 2 weeks because it takes roughly 15 days for COVID to gestate. So yeah, maybe like every 12 days you get tested just to make sure that you're not fucking spreading a disease around that could kill people. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Libertarians don't like it because, oh, it's the big evil scary government enforcing tyranny on me. You know, these are the same people that I remember having conversations like this back in the 90s with people about seatbelts. You know, it didn't always used to be a law that you had to wear your seatbelt, right? In some states it still isn't. But like for example, California, you have to wear a seatbelt in California, you get a ticket. People lost their minds over that shit. People went crazy. This, I think it was like I was a small child when this happened. I was still in grade school, but I remember it didn't used to be a law. And there was like a big thing about, click it or ticket, right? Is what they say in California. You better fucking put on your seatbelt or you're getting a ticket. People went crazy over that. And there was like, marches and shit, you know, and editorials and stuff. I mean, there was no internet at that time, so thankfully we didn't have, videos of people losing their shit in front of like fucking city council meetings and stuff like that. But there was definitely a lot of pushback when it came to the seatbelt laws, and it's because they equate it with tyranny. It's like the same thing. California also made it like a law that you had to wear a helmet if you're a fucking riding a motorcycle. You don't have a choice. You don't wear a helmet, you get a ticket, just like having a seatbelt. Libertarians lost their minds over that shit too. I should be able to like, crash into a fucking wall and kill myself if I feel like it. Like even though like wearing a helmet, like, the number one cause of death from motorcycles is fucking injury to your head. Right? The number two is of course getting paralyzed because you know, land head first and your fucking neck breaks. But that's different. I don't know. This is why I don't ride a motorcycle. But still, it's like, yeah, it's not tyranny in order to enforce basic fucking like safety precautions. That's not tyranny. That's not at all. That is providing for the general welfare, in my opinion, at least. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a judge, but it just seems fucking logical to me that it should be. Um, Kind of went off on a movement there. So yeah, we were talking about anti-vaxxers and shit. A lot of those fucking morons in the Libertarian Party. Why is this? Why do so many of these crazy people show up and become libertarians? Well, you have this first off, like I said before, the extreme fringe groups and fringe thinking, fringe philosophy will tend to attract fringe people, right? So a lot of these people, and a lot of these people are not welcome in other, say, political parties or political groups, you know. So, like, for example, the hardcore white nationalists will get kicked out of conservative groups, right? Not so much because the conservative group doesn't believe the same shit that they believe, but because of the optics. It makes them look bad, right? So, they'll be kicked out, and they go to the places where people don't regulate them, right? The other reason is, of course, you have this idea of what they call crank magnetism, right? And crank magnetism is sort of like if you believe in one ridiculous thing, then your mind will kind of be open to other ridiculous things. So you ever notice that it's never like a guy just believes in one conspiracy theory. You ever notice that? You know, it's not like, oh, I believe that JFK was assassinated, but I don't believe in anything else. So it's like, no, they'll believe that. They'll believe that, lots of other shit. Then they'll believe that the moon landings are faked. They'll believe that fucking Paul McCartney's dead. They'll believe that, 9/11 was an inside job. All the shit. And it's like, because, fringe ideas attract other fringe ideas. So you go on a website to read about JFK, and then all this other shit's on there, and before you know it, you're like making Facebook posts about like Jewish reptilian aliens that are using sniper rifles to shoot people with, you know, microchips and shit. If they're not just putting it instead of vaccines to begin with, to like, you know, I don't know, fucking make people get abortions or something. You know what I mean? Like, whatever. It's like, and so that's kind of what ends up happening, is that that's why you have like a lot of conspiracy theories from libertarian circles. And, a lot of, I mean, because that's one thing that is sort of infecting the right wing in general. This overwhelming, like, prevalence of conspiracy theories, things like fucking gamer, or not Gamergate, but things like fucking QAnon, and Pizzagate, shit like that, right? That's all over the right wing, and it's very much a very, very big, like, part of modern American libertarianism, is this idea that they're like warriors fighting against the fucking establishment, and the establishment is really run by satanic, baby raping Democrats. That's a very big thing, right? Um, so just to kind of give an idea of what I'm talking about, because a lot of these people are very much involved in not just, libertarian circles, but also libertarian politics. Here's my favorite guy that I like to talk about when we talk about crank libertarian. Oh shit. Here we go. Crank libertarians. This guy is named Stan Jones. Right. Oh, wait. There we go. Stan Jones. There we go. Right. Let's make that a little bigger. You'll notice Stan Jones, his skin is blue. He kind of looks like a kind of palish, blue sort of Smurf person, right? Why is that? It's because Stan Jones um, took a thing called colloidal silver, right? Which colloidal silver is what they used to take back in the 18th and 19th centuries, before they had antibiotics. If you had a cold, if you had a flu, you'd take colloidal silver because it has sort of antibiotic properties. However, if you keep taking this shit, what happens is that the silver salts build up in your body, and then you wake up one day and your fucking skin is blue, right? And you have lots of other health problems as well. It's not just your skin turns blue, but other shit happens to you. And it's because basically he was an alternative medicine freak who like didn't like support big pharma, because he thought that big pharma was putting fucking viruses and shit inside of their medicine in order to like control people, whatever, right? And so he's like, oh, I don't need that. I don't need to listen to doctors. I don't need to do any of that shit. I can just fucking like, rely on myself according to my libertarian ideals of self-reliance, and I know just as much about medicine as my doctor does, so I'm gonna take this shit from 200 years ago that turns fucking people's skin blue. So that's Stan Jones, right? Let me just make that a little, let's go back and make that a little smaller. 100%. Stan Jones was actually a libertarian politician. He ran for the United States Senate in 2002 and 2006. Luckily, he lost both times. He also ran for the governor of Montana. So, can you imagine that shit? You go to vote, right? You see the people that you're voting for or whatever. You're seeing a a debate or something for the governor's race, and then this fucking guy with blue skin gets up in front of everybody, starts spouting some bullshit about like taxation, right? Stan Jones was also very much very socially conservative. He was anti-abortion, um, supported the death penalty, was anti-gay rights, anti-gay marriage, and he also believed in the New World Order, one world government conspiracy theory. Just another example of what I was talking about, crank magnetism. There it is, crank magnetism in action, right there. You know. So yeah, that's a good example. Another guy, his name is James Weeks. James Weeks is the guy that, let me just copy this. If you remember James Weeks, what happened was, close that. James Weeks was a guy that went up in front of the Libertarian Party convention in 2016, where he was running for chairman of the party, and he stripped all of his clothes off. So here's a video of James Weeks. This is the guy right here, this big sort of like, you know, burly fucking, let's just get rid of this audio, like, beard looking dude. That's James Weeks, right? I'm not going to play this video for you because, you will need some eye bleach, but basically he starts dancing around, he's getting people clapping, they're all clapping, ha 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 ha. Then he starts fucking taking his clothes off and shit, and then by this point he's like, almost butt naked. He's got like a thong on, right? So I'll put this down in the, if you want to laugh at a fat man, stripping for the Libertarian Party, that's a video of James Weeks. He also has a podcast. Let me just copy this also. If you want to check this guy out, he's not that insane, really. I listened to a little bit of one of his podcasts. He's not completely insane, but yeah, I think this was more of a stunt. According to him, he said he lost a bet, and that's why he went up and stripped in front of the Libertarian, caucus like that. But anyway, just as another example, I mean, can you imagine, say, like, you're watching a presidential debate or something, and, like Biden and Trump, and then Trump starts fucking taking his clothes off, like, I don't know, it's just funny, you know. Another guy, another libertarian crank who actually ran for office is a guy named Augustus Sol Invictus, right? Which, if you've never heard of him, he is a bona fide, straight up Nazi, white supremacist, Holocaust denier, and all around piece of shit. Um, he has never actually acknowledged what his real name is. Nobody actually knows what his actual real name is. Sol Invictus, of course, is a pagan deity that many people think was a prototype Jesus Christ back in the day. It was basically the Russian sun god. There are early Roman, early Christian artwork of Jesus as Sol Invictus. So a lot of scholars think that Roman sun worship kind of like transitioned over into Christianity back then. Sol Invictus he ran for, let's see, the Libertarian ticket in Florida for the Senate. And apparently the state party chairman in Florida resigned in protest over that. He was also one of the headline speakers at the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally back in 2017. You remember that rally where Heather Heyer got ran over and killed? That's where this guy spoke at. And he's a general, human piece of shit all around. Another thing, he's apparently also a pagan, and very famously at one point slaughtered a goat in the wilderness where he was like staying for 40 days or whatever, and like drink its blood. So he's engaging in fucking animal sacrifices. You know, a lot of modern pagans will tell you that's bullshit, right? You know, modern pagans do not usually engage in in animal sacrifices like that. So, you know, crank magnetism, people, right? Let's see. Let's just color this all in. So yeah, you know, you do get a lot of insane, crazy people. One thing that you may notice that all of these people that I'm mentioning, with probably the exception of James Weeks, I'm not really sure yet, is that you get a lot of racists. You get a lot of racist people, a lot of white nationalists, a lot of Holocaust deniers, stuff like that. They all kind of tend to show up in the Libertarian Party. And this is a thing that a lot of people on the left have talked about, this sort of libertarian to the alt-right pipeline, which very much is a thing. You know, there are lots of people who that would be on the alt-right nowadays that came to it, you know, through they came to their journey through libertarian stances and philosophies, right? For example, Stefan Molyneux. If you don't know who Stefan Molyneux is, he's a ex-YouTuber. I don't think he's on YouTube anymore. I think YouTube finally kicked him. But he's kind of like the world's worst philosopher. You know, like one of these guys that sounds like he knows what he's talking about, but if you actually listen to what he actually says, he's completely full of shit. You know, this sort of like wannabe philosopher that really has no fucking clue what he's talking about, and you know, kind of like speaks, I don't know, just his own ideas are really fucking stupid. Like, I don't know. Anyway, so he started out back in the day on YouTube, and he was very much a libertarian. You know, had libertarian ideals about things. He would talk about, you know, he'd make videos and shit about how like the social contract doesn't exist, and then he kind of turned into an anti-feminist and all that stuff. And then, you know, by the end of his tenure, he sort of went mask off full fascist, you know, full racist. And he's got videos of him in Poland and stuff talking about how, like, you know, there's no racial hatred in Poland because everybody's white and that kind of thing. Right. And so, yeah, he definitely is a good example of this sort of alt-right to, you know, libertarian to alt-right pipeline. Another example here is Milo Yiannopoulos, often described himself as a libertarian. For those of you who have forgotten, and please forgive me for reminding you who Milo Yiannopoulos was, but he was the sort of token gay guy on the alt-right, you know, who would describe himself like everybody says, "Oh, I'm actually a liberal, whatever," and but no, he was very much part of the, you know, alt-right, um, and is nowadays Milo Yiannopoulos has come out and said that he's no longer gay, and he kind of runs an he runs a gay conversion therapy camp now. He's trying to convince people that he's like Christian, you know, and that even though he still like lives with his husband, that they're not having sex anymore. It's like, who the fuck are you trying to kid? Right? It's obvious bullshit. So basically, you know, Milo Yiannopoulos, what happened is that he came out in support of, he said some things in support of pedophilia, because once again, you know, libertarian ideals when it comes to the age of consent, you know, kind of lends to pedophiles and shit identifying as libertarians. And that was a bridge too far for Milo Yiannopoulos' fans. He kind of lost all of his support, lost his Patreon, stuff like that. Milo Yiannopoulos is one of these guys who was making something like $60,000 a fucking month off Patreon. Lost all of that shit, and now he's sort of reinvented himself as a conservative Christian. He's no longer gay, and he's trying to convince people that he's like, you know, trying to save young gay men's souls, and it's all a fucking grift. He's completely full of shit. He's just doing it for the money. It's bullshit. You know, people don't just suddenly turn to be anti-fuck gay. You know, and he's like still living with his husband even though we don't have sex anymore and blah blah. Get the fuck out of here. I don't believe you for a nanosecond. Milo Yiannopoulos is a fucking troll, and fuck that guy. Gavin McInnes also self-identifies as libertarian. If you don't know who he is the founder of the Proud Boys. Is a staunch, anti-feminist, misogynist, and proto-fascist. Because of him, we have the Proud Boys going around the whole country, assaulting people, and in some cases fucking murdering people. Thanks a lot, Gavin McInnes. Richard Spencer is a full-blown white nationalist Nazi piece of fucking shit, and also arrived at his current views through libertarianism. You know, don't need to talk so much about Richard Spencer. His reputation speaks for himself. You know, he's a fucking asshole. Another guy who, another alt-right prominent figure who began as a libertarian is a guy named Christopher Cantwell, who, if you don't know who he is the infamous crying Nazi, right? Christopher Cantwell, if you don't know who, if you don't remember him, he's the bald guy that, let me open this one, open this link. Hopefully there won't be any videos on this page. Let me just make sure that it's all cool. And here is the link that I'm opening. Let me put it down here. Okay. Okay. Goddamn, there's so many ads on these fucking things. So this guy right here. Christopher Cantwell, crying Nazi, sentenced to 41 months in prison for extortion. That guy. I'm sure you remember that guy. He was also one of the prominent dudes at the Unite the Right rally. He has a alt-right white supremacist fucking podcast, or it was a podcast or a radio show, something like that. And he is now in prison for threatening other Nazis. This is actually a nice little nice little article if you can get past all the fucking ads on it. So yeah, he's spending the next 41 months behind bars. Fuck him, he's a piece of shit also. But this guy actually came to, at least he says that he came to his current views through libertarianism. So from that article, right, which, it's interesting if you want to read it, but he basically talks about how, back before he was like that, active in the alt-right, that he started reading certain libertarian literature, one from a guy named Hans Hermann Hoppe, a book called Democracy, The God That I Failed, some other things like that. And then it was also the immigration, I guess, what is it, the refugee crisis in Europe that also kind of turned him as well, according to him, But anyway, definitely recommend looking into that guy. So yeah, I think we're pretty much at the end. I was going to do a whole thing about libertarians and the age of consent, but to be honest, that can take up an entire stream all on its own. Suffice to say that you get a lot of support among pedophiles, a lot of support among fucking other associated type people when it comes to the age of consent from libertarianism. I found this quote as I was looking around researching this stuff. Here's a quote that I found from a guy on Reddit when they were talking about the libertarian stance on the age of consent. This particular person, I wiped out his name there because I don't want anybody to get harassed. His name, he would go with 14 at the age of consent because the vast majority of people at that age are physically developed enough for sexual activity. This is what he's saying. I'm not saying this. With physical readiness comes the natural desire to obtain sex. All that would be left to do is then provide with a brief primer on sexual health so that these individuals can manage their newfound desires correctly through informed decision making, i.e., consent. You know, forgetting the fact that as a child, you don't really have the ability to consent, especially when you're 14 years old, because you're a child and you don't have any fucking clue what's going on whatsoever. And once again, it ignores the power dynamic. You know, according to them, you're a libertarian, right? Every person is equal. This includes children. So how come a 14-year-old girl doesn't want to get with a 36-year-old guy? It should be allowed, right? She should be allowed to make that decision. It completely ignores the fact that as a child, you just basically, the power dynamic between a 36-year-old, for example, 36-year-old man and a 14-year-old girl completely ignores that, and how one would be taking advantage of the other, you know. And suffice to say, I found too much when it came to that. I was researching that a little bit. I found way too much to fit in this stream when it came to age of consent and libertarianism. So most likely, if that's not that may be the subject of next week's stream, you know, because there's a lot. There's a lot from lots of libertarian thinkers throughout the years, Murray Rothbard and so on when it comes to, this subject. And also, it's a very touchy subject, which might get my stream canceled, so I'd much rather do it on its own, so that way I know if my stream suddenly stops for some fucking reason. Somebody reported me or whatever. YouTube doesn't usually like it when you talk about pedophilia. Anyway. Basically, I don't like libertarians. I think they suck. I think the philosophy sucks, specifically for this reason. The main reason being is that it is essentially just been, first off, it's been exploited and bent around by big business to basically just become a vehicle for them to, you know, influence policy in such a way that allows them to get away with polluting, with exploiting people, like the aforementioned Koch brothers that we were talking about. Koch brothers, sorry, that's a Freudian slip. Kind of becomes like everything that all the policies that they advocate for, all directly benefit big business in essentially every way. You know, they want to get rid of government regulations because of it. It requires, basically it puts hampers on big business, and it requires taxation. And it's sort of like a lot of the platforms that you see in the Libertarian Party, and so on, seem to be directly tailor-made to help big business get away with exploiting the environment and exploiting people. So I really don't like that. And I really don't like that aspect of libertarianism. The other reason why I don't like it personally is because, besides the fact that, like, so many cranks and racists and white supremacists and white nationalists tend to fucking join these people, the other reason why I don't like it is because their solutions are just not practical. They don't have actual real solutions to anything. They have bullshit made up solutions that have no practical application in real life. And if we were to ever actually go that way with any of their solutions, it would cause a measurable decrease in quality of life for people. For example, the idea that, say, we should all have to provide for a private police force, that we should have, what do they call them? There's a name that they call them, the private police force, basically, that, you sign on to, right? Instead of a government-run police force that treats everybody equally under the law. Although in real life it doesn't, and I'm the first person to say that, hey, we've got some serious problems when it comes to policing. But, in theory, that's how it should work. Libertarians want to get rid of that completely. They'd much rather have you have to pay for a private security force. Wrong layer. Private security organization or whatever. And it just, has no real practical effect. You know, in real life, it would just completely like all it would really do is just exasperate the inequality between rich and poor. We can talk about that too. In fact, I think I'll save that for its own separate stream as well. Criticisms of libertarian policy, you know, when it comes to things like private services that the government provides now. You know, that can be its own entire stream about like why all that shit doesn't work as well. Um, but anyway, yeah. So it's just essentially like conservatives, you know, that are more kooky, which is why I don't like them. They're conservatives that are more insane, that are more kooky, that have more beliefs in conspiracy theories and shit like that, and they're equally as dangerous, in my opinion. You know, so that's why I think they suck. Anyhow, let's read some of the comments from you guys, because I think I've blabbed enough about, you know, my own shit here. So why don't we read some of the things that you guys are saying here? Let's see, moving up. Lewis a Hedgehog. Some people really need to learn that liberty and neglect are not the same thing. Also in anarchy, liberty and neglect are not the same thing. Not so sure what you mean about that. Like, you mean that liberty and neglect are not the same thing. You mean like the freedom to not do something, or the freedom to like? Well, okay. I think all right. So do you mean like say the freedom to take risks? Is that what you're talking about? Because I can understand that. So that's also another stance that libertarians take, right? Where they talk about say you should have the freedom to take risks, right? And I understand that, and it's true. Like that was actually one of the pushbacks against seatbelts back in the day. That well, people should be allowed to decide whether or not they want to use this safety feature, right? And the rationale goes something like this. Well, anything you do, there's always an element of risk, and you can't regulate that element of risk away. And that's true, right? There are always going to be risks no matter what. It doesn't matter how safe you make your car, for example, you will always have the risk of getting in a car accident and dying. And, you know, if you completely, you know, take away all of that risk, like, if, like, you know, you could say, for example, let's pass a law that says all cars have to have roll cages. You know, there you go, right? That's an example. Well, that's going to increase the price of cars. They're going to become expensive, blah, blah, blah. It's going to reduce fuel economy, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of different reasons. And, you know, the argument goes like, well, if I want to drive around in a car that's unsafe, if I want to, like, you know, take this risk, I should be allowed. And in some respects, that's true. It's like you should be allowed to do crazy things. You should be allowed to, say, for example, if you want to be fucking Evel Knievel and try to jump the Grand Canyon or whatever, you know, within reason, right? The problem comes where, well, if it's risky behavior that is detrimental to the lives of people, for example, so why, for example, are seatbelt laws, I think, not an example of this, right? Not a good example. Like, for example, you know, why do I believe that the government should be able to enforce a seatbelt mandate? It's because taken in the aggregate, right, then you can see how it's done. You know, there was something like before the seatbelt mandate in most of the states now, you know, there was something like 30,000 people a year would die in car accidents, like a shitload, you know. And even though like, well, not even that, like a 30,000 additional people then who die now, you know. And it would be a very common thing to get in a car accident and fly through the windshield, get ejected, you know, and then you'd fly, like, you get knocked out of the car and then fly 20 feet and land on your face and fucking die. And that's the main thing that the seatbelt does, is that it keeps you in place so that you're not ejected from the car and you don't break your neck. And taken in the aggregate, it's like, well, if we can save, for example, 30,000 lives a year, I kind of think that's a mandate for a government to, that falls under the general welfare clause. You know what I mean? Like, although I know provide for the general welfare is not actually a law, that is still kind of falls under that mandate that no, they should be looking out for you. Like basic like safety kind of measures. So, but yeah, it is true. Yeah, what you're saying. Like, I mean, I don't know if that's exactly what you mean. You know, um, it's like you should have the freedom to do things within reason, I guess. You know what I mean? But not when it hurts other people, right? And the government, I mean, the thing is that the government can give you a ticket, but it's not like there's a camera in your car that won't start, like, or so here's another example, like the auto industry could make a car that just won't start unless you put in a seatbelt. There you go. And I'm pretty sure that libertarians would freak out over that too. Be like, oh, this is also tyranny. It's corporate communism, like Marjorie Taylor Greene says and shit like that. That would be a way of enforcing this without a government mandate. Right. But I think it's just much more simple. It's much simpler just to say, hey, the law says you have to fucking put on a seatbelt. And if you don't and a cop catches you, you get $50. Like, a ticket for $50 or something. I think it's just a much more practical solution to that. So I don't know, but I mean that's the thing. These are all things that can be debated. It's just the way that you enact these things, right? Like everything else, like every single libertarian idea is not a bad thing either. There's plenty of good things that they believe. They tend to be anti-war, for example. That's a great thing in my opinion. Right? I wish more conservatives were like that. Maybe the reasons that, we don't really match up, with, but the outcome may be the same. And that might be some positive things that we could take from them. So, um, you know, what else we got here? Louis the Hedgehog, also in an arachnid, anarcho-capitalist state, who controls the nukes? Well, the rich people. And in an anarcho-capitalist state, the rich people would be the only ones who can afford the nuclear bombs to begin with, right? They're the only ones who would be able to hire the scientists and to to create the bomb and to hire the miners to mine the uranium and all that shit. So obviously that means that John Galt and his assortment of rich people will be the only ones who will have nuclear weapons, right? Anarcho-capitalism is essentially just feudalism, is what it is. That's the logical outcome of anarcho-capitalism. You have no rules at all. The guys with the money make the rules. Guess what? That's one step below fucking, before you know it, the dude owns everything, and he's passing a law saying that he gets to have sex with your wife on your wedding night and shit. That's exactly the logical conclusion of anarcho-capitalism. So, the rich people are going to have the armies. That's the other thing. That's another thing. When they talk about private security forces, the rich person is going to be able to afford a better private security force than your force. They're going to have better guns, all that stuff, and they're going to be able to enforce their fucking will on you, whether you like it or not. But we'll save that for another stream. Let's see. Brainbug, libertarianism, the capitalist theocracy model. Very true. Very, very, very true there. Louis the Hedgehog, remember when I said if your ideology cannot survive without constantly rejecting new information, what good is it? Well, this is an example why. It is. It is. See, that's another thing is like, for example, libertarians tend to very much be in favor of, that sort of like unregulated hyper-capitalism that you get from like the, what do they call that? um, Austrian School of Economics, you know what I mean? The kind of free market, like capital, like sort of like the free market will solve everything kind of bullshit. And that doesn't really work all that well in real life either. Not when it comes to, other issues besides monetary policy, right? The free market, for example, is not seeming to do very well when it comes to abortion in this country, is it? Right? We just had a state outlaw abortion. Texas, for all practical purposes, it's outlawed. Yet 70% of the people in the country support abortion. So you would think that, pretty much the majority of the people in the country support abortion. They want abortion. Even the majority of people in Texas support abortion. You would think abortion would be legal, but nope. Because, the free market in real life doesn't really control very much when it comes to things that don't have to do with selling products in a store, right? When it comes to stuff that doesn't have to do with business, right? That kind of thing. When it comes to I don't know, social issues, free market doesn't really seem to control very much at all. It seems to be very much who is in control of everything politically are the people that fucking you know control the laws in regards to social issues, right? So I don't know. Anyway, going on. Dynacat loves me. Is money voluntary? Well, I guess it's voluntary in how much you spend, not maybe so much how much you earn. You know, it's voluntary if you're rich. Then yeah, you get to say it's voluntary. Not so much when you don't have any. Let's see, Dynacat. I'd love to know so many 30-something. I'd love to know how so many 30-something guys living in their mom's basements without a job become convinced that every individual should be responsible for themselves. Yeah, that's definitely true. You know, it's very much the culture. That's what it is. A lot of what conservatives and libertarians and everything, it's informed by their culture, and it's like the same way that you have conservative Christians in the country who are pro-military, right, and pro-death penalty and all that stuff. Where in the Bible, it's like it says you should turn the other cheek. The Bible is very much, pacifistic when it comes to that stuff. The Bible says, if a man steals from you, steals your cloak, then give him your shirt also, or something like that. Or if he steals your shirt, give him your cloak, or whatever that quote is. I might be butchering that quote. Turn the other cheek. If he hits you on one cheek, turn around and show the other cheek. It's very much a love your enemy kind of thing. But in the conservative Christians around the country take the exact opposite stance on that. They're very pro-military. They're very pro-police state when it comes to other people besides them, at least, right? And it's because it's like it's really your culture which informs you of these things. It's not your ideology. And this is why people believe whatever the fuck they want, regardless of whatever ideology they say they believe in. Because it's their culture. People are going to believe in what they want to believe, and they're just going to find some way to justify it. So you're a libertarian because you hate taxes, but you also hate abortion. So you're going to come up with some bullshit about why libertarians really should be anti-abortion, but also anti-taxes. You're going to come, or pro-abortion or whatever, anti-abortion, right? They're going to come up with some bullshit about why the government, it's okay for them to pass a law outlawing abortion, but not okay for them to pass a law to raise taxes. You're going to do that because this is what you want, and people, it's not really. It's just kind of like that everywhere, and even in leftist circles too. I'm not saying that leftist movements and left-leaning movements and progressive movements and stuff are immune to this, because they're not. You find plenty of contradictions and all that. It's just it doesn't seem to me to be as blatant as what you see on the right wing. When it comes to these sorts of going against when it comes to just doing the exact opposite of what your ideology says that you should be doing. seems like the left, in my opinion, is much more ideologically consistent when it comes to that kind of stuff. So, but I don't know. I could be wrong. Let's see. Genghis Vern, liberty and democracy are two sides of the same coin. I don't think liberty and democracy are incompatible, right? I think that, you know, they're very much compatible. And because that's another thing you'll see from libertarians, they'll say some shit like, well, they'll tend to have anti-democratic stances on things, you know. You get this idea that the tyranny of the majority, right? Well, if it's a democracy, then the 51% gets to tell the 49% what to do. You know, it's like wolves voting, you know, for the sheep as to what's for dinner. You know, that's one. I think I just butchered that quote, but you know, that's one thing you'll hear a lot from libertarians, right? And this is why, strictly speaking, there are limits on democracy as well. You know, there are social. You know, in order for democracy to be, you know, beneficial, there needs to be, um, you know, limits to democracy as well. So, for example, you should have encoded in the law basic protections for minorities and protected classes. You shouldn't be able to, for example, to be able to vote in a law that takes away rights from somebody, right? That is something that I think is, you know, compatible with democracy. You know, like the Bill of Rights, perfect example. Congress shall make no law establishing a religion. You know, you have your search and seizure rights, stuff like that. You know, et cetera, et cetera. That's perfectly compatible with democracy. And, you know, as long as you put in a process that protects those rights. Well, you know, libertarians don't believe in that. They don't believe in the idea that, you know, a governing authority should be the one that guarantees your rights. They believe that you yourself personally are the only person that can guarantee your rights, and that's why they tend to also be very in support of the Second Amendment of owning guns and stuff, you know. So it's like, and yeah, I mean, that's why they also, you'll also see some very anti-democratic, you know, rhetoric coming from libertarian circles as well, for that reason, you know. Which is another thing that leads to the, you know, so many alt-right figures and racists and things kind of joining in on you know, becoming, reaching their stances through libertarian ideals, right? Here's why. Let me kind of talk a little bit about this also. So why is it? Why, you know, because we explained, we talked about how, well, there are all of these sort of alt-right figures and racists and et cetera, you know, who claim to be libertarians, right? Well, how is that compatible with libertarian ideology? Because you would think that, you know, being a racist, being a white supremacist, right? You would think that would be the exact opposite of what it means to be a libertarian, right? It doesn't seem like those two stances should match up, right? Well, this is how they arrive at it. So the idea is that, well, you know, if every person only has themselves to rely on, if every person is a, you know, if every man is an island, and you yourself personally are solely responsible for your own situation, then that means that the effects of institutional racism don't apply. So they can just discount that. And that must mean that the reason why, say, for example, minorities don't make as much money as white people, black people don't make as much money, minorities, like, you know, blacks and Latinos tend to go to prison longer, and there's more of them in prison, that kind of thing, then that must mean there's something wrong with them, right? If you discount all of the factors of institutional racism, the history of racism and how that affects say, the earning potential of people nowadays. You know, the idea that minorities, black people, and other minorities in this country don't have much in the way of generational wealth in the United States because of institutional racism in the past. If you discount all of that, your philosophy says none of that matters, then your only logical conclusion is that, well, it's just the people themselves. There's something wrong with them. There's something wrong with black people if they don't make as much money as white people, if they go to prison for longer than white people, if they, you know, et cetera, right? It's their problem, you know, and it comes from completely failing to acknowledge or just outright denying that these other things are factors. That, well, for generations, for example, black people weren't allowed to have bank accounts even, you know, or not just, you know, not just move out of crappy areas, you know, that they were forced into ghettos and shit like that, and due to like redlining and that kind of thing, other types of practices which are now illegal, which weren't for decades and decades and decades, you know, just ignoring all of that sort of like institutional discrimination, right? And the idea that they would, you know, the fact that black people get stopped more often, even nowadays, you know, that when they get sentenced, they tend to get longer prison sentences, just in general, for the same, you know, for the same crime, and whatever institutional racism, you know, influences that. You know, the fact, like one example that I always like to use is the example of sentencing disparities between crack and powder cocaine. Perfect example, right? You know, you go to jail far longer for having an equal amount of crack versus powder cocaine, even though crack and powder cocaine are almost identical chemically. It's like, it's almost exactly the same substance. It's just, you know, black people tend to use crack more than powder cocaine, white people tend to use powder cocaine more, and that's why those, you know, those sentences are that's where that disparity comes from, you know. That's actually critical race theory would examine stuff like that. That thing that all the Republicans are denying and trying to outlaw. That's what critical race theory is for, identifying those types of disparities in our law. You know, those types of um, you know, institutional racism. You know, influence of institutional racism in our law and society, stuff like that. Anyway, yeah, libertarians ignore all that shit, and they say, well, you know, since none of that applies, and there's something wrong with them, you know, and that's that kind of opens the door for lots of racist ideology to come in here. Suddenly, it's like, well, why then? What's wrong with them? Well, it must be obviously that white people are just genetically superior, right? You know, and that's kind of where it comes from, and that's, you know, and the thing is, this is why we see this pattern over and over and over of, you know, libertarians fucking jumping ship and joining the alt-right, coming out as extreme racists and stuff like that, believing in things like rational racism, scientific racism, you know, this idea that, oh, it's just due to science that black people are just genetically inferior and blah, 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 blah. And it fits in quite well. Fits in quite well with a political philosophy that says that we shouldn't be paying taxes on anything. It fits in quite well, the idea that, well, you know, our tax dollars are wasted on these people because they're just genetically inferior. Fits in really, really well with that. So this is why you see so many of these fucking people, like, you know, tending to run in libertarian circles like that. Why there's so many fucking racists. Why there's so many white supremacists. You know, because these ideologies, they kind of complement one another. Anyway, who we got here? Who's else? Sean Lungerman. How you doing, man? Came to this late, but libertarianism originally used to be a leftist thing. Before the 50s, libertarians were basically anarcho-communists, but the term was co-opted by the right wing after that. Yeah, we kind of actually talked about that a little bit in the beginning. that exact point there. It is very, and the thing is, around the rest of the world, it's still very much, you know, synonymous with what you would call social libertarians, or left-leaning libertarians, right? But yeah, in the United States, it's very much like almost exclusively a right-wing phenomenon. I mean, and there are of course left-leaning libertarians in the United States as well. It's just they're very 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 underrepresented. What else we got here? Lewis the Hedgehog. Yes, how they handle the pandemic is what I wanted you to talk about. Yeah, anything but the vaccine. Adversary fandom. Lewis the Hedgehog. You know what they call alternative medicine that works? Medicine. Yes, yes, there is. Yeah, it's just that sort of general kookery. You know what I mean? That general just wackaloonness. Where you get just alternative medicine freaks. They also tend to believe in lots of libertarians. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, what's their solution? That's what I want to hear. Okay, it's like, all right, you don't want the government to mandate a vaccine, right? You don't want them to mandate mask wearing. What's your solution? How do you curtail a pandemic? If people don't want to take the fucking vaccine that works, and they don't want to take the fucking, they don't want to wear a mask, then how do you stop it? At what point does it become legitimate for a government to mandate these things? How many people have to die? What? Obviously not 600,000. So what? When does it get bad enough? What? A million people? 2 million people? 10 million people? Does it never become bad enough? Just at any point? Like, is it? I guess this kind of circles back to what we were talking about, where you should be allowed to take a risk. You should be allowed to take a risk of getting a disease and dying. Okay. Well, what about all the other fucking people that you infect? You know, that are wearing masks and stuff like that, and they get infected because your fucking like stubborn ass doesn't want to like take precautions. You know, how is it? And according to me, that actually is, you know, um, aggression, right? You often hear libertarians talking about the non-aggression principle, and the idea that it's like, well, I can do whatever I want. I can swing my fist as long as it ends at your nose and I don't hurt you. And then you should be able to do whatever you want as long as you don't hurt people. Well, seems to me that not taking a fucking vaccine and not wearing a mask kind of violates the non-aggression principle, because through your inaction, you are putting people in danger, right? That's what it seems. It seems to me that that's the case. That and because that's the thing that people always seem to forget this when it comes to the Rona, is that 40% of people will never show any symptoms who have gotten it. You may have had this and just not even known because you had no symptoms, and you may have spread it around without even knowing. And what about the 10 people that you fucking spread the shit to in the 2 weeks where you were communicable? You know, and the one guy that actually, the three people that caught it and the one guy that ended up in the hospital. Because of your fucking inaction, those people got harmed. That seems to me that, if you really believed in the non-aggression principle, if you really believe that you should not engage in actions which result in, putting other people in danger, seems to me that taking a vaccine, or wearing a mask would be important to you, something that you would want to do. So, just another example of how, libertarian philosophy is not, in practice, is not really consistent. You know, the shit looks fine on paper, but in real life, doesn't really seem to work out that way, right? Let's see. What else we got here? Lewis the Hedgehog. I meant when people keep saying that social safety nets would destroy their freedom. Well, look what that did to the Texas power grid, is freezing to death freedom. You mean like the ability to freeze to death? Yeah, surprisingly, there would be people that would say that would, and this is not my own personal belief. I don't believe any of this shit. So, but yeah, that there would be people that would put that under the right to take risks. And, and that's the thing is that because I agree, you would think that, hey, that should be some government regulation there. The government should regulate the power companies because they have a monopoly, right? In order to get them to weatherize their equipment, because that's what happened during the big freeze last year, which it's going to happen again. Watch. I bet you $1 million it happens again this year. But the big freeze where it was because these power companies didn't weatherize their equipment, and so like fucking all their power transformers blew up and shit like that. And they didn't weatherize their equipment because that costs money. That costs money, and they don't want to spend the money. And the only way that you can really get them to spend the money is to pass a regulation saying, hey, you fucking have to spend this money, you know? And according to the libertarians, no, that shouldn't be a thing. The government shouldn't force them to do it. And if you don't like it, then just go start your own power company, I remember having this conversation with a guy once also, way back in the day. We were talking about oil companies. And he basically, when I was talking about pollution, the guy said, well, if you don't like it, start your own oil company. Yeah, like anybody can just wake up one day and be like, you know what, I'm going to start drilling for oil. I'm going to start my oil company. I'm going to go down. I'm going to fucking cash in. I'm going to take my bank account, I'm going to take my my $300 that I have in the bank, and I'm going to start Mark's Oil Company or whatever. I have way more than $300 in the bank now, but at the point then I didn't. And I'm just gonna do that. It's bullshit. It's like, no, like you can't start your own fucking energy company. That's not gonna work. A lot of places you couldn't even get like clean water. That's another thing. Like I live in a condo, you know. I can't just sink a well and get my own water source if somebody starts polluting my water. It doesn't work like that. It's like, and that's what I mean when I say like these people don't have any practical fucking solutions. They have like dumb shit pie in the sky solutions that will never be practical and never work. Like, I don't know, it's ridiculous, man. Inshoma, quick hello, Mark. Sadly, a lot of conservatives, libertarians suffer from psychological issues that affect their better judgment, hence authoritarianism, conspiracy paranoia, scapegoating, and apathy. Well, yes. I also think, though, that it is detrimental to just call all these people crazy. Um, it's easy to call one person crazy, but when you have thousands and thousands of people that believe the same shit, they're not all crazy. You know what I mean? There is something else at work here. I think, and I guess the best way that I can describe it is that it just has a lot to do with culture. You know, what is it about conservative culture that lends itself to a belief in conspiracy theories, for example, right? What is that? Why is it that the conservatives, like all the QAnon people and all of the fucking like NWO freaks and all those people, they're like overwhelmingly conservative. What is it? Why is that, right? I don't know. I think my theory is that a lot of it has to do with religion. And the more conservative you are, the more likely you are to be a Christian and just believe in religion of any kind, not even just being a Christian, but you're just more likely to be more religious. And the more religious you are, the more predisposed you are into believing fantastic things. Because religion, in my opinion, in and of itself is a fantastic belief. The idea that there are spiritual realms out there and spiritual creatures like angels and demons and shit, Because if you believe in heaven, if you believe in Jesus, then you believe in heaven. If you believe in heaven, then you believe that people have an existence after death. And if you believe that there are souls, you believe people have souls. If you believe people have souls, then that also means that you believe in ghosts, right? That's a thing, right? It opens the door to it at least. It doesn't mean that you automatically believe it, but it opens the door to the belief in ghosts, which means you also believe in angels. And if you believe in angels, then that also means you believe in demons. Because if you believe in God, then you also have to believe in Satan, because it talks about Satan in the Bible, kind of, sort of. Not really, but that's the culture, right? And then if you believe in ghosts, then why not fucking monsters? Why not demons? Why not, you know, then if it's, well, if those things are fucking real, then obviously Bigfoot must be real. And you see how the shit just sort of just snowballs like that. And then before you know it, it's like you're believing in like invisible aliens that are tripping people up, and like the Russians beaming fucking like radio signals into your head, you know, and all of these things, and that's how all of this shit kind of snowballs, and then you get people like you're saying, Raph, who are like have mental problems, you know, people who are schizophrenic, shit like that, and they latch onto these conspiracy theories, and like, that becomes part of their paranoia, exactly like you're saying. And before you know it, there's like a guy parked outside of the fucking, Capitol building claiming that he's got a bomb in his truck and shit, or he's going up on a water tower sniping people. That's definitely, and it just seems that it's like they're always conservatives, man. You guys ever notice this shit? When was the last time there was a mass shooter who wasn't conservative? You know, like, seriously, when was the last time there was a guy that threatened to blow himself up or whatever who wasn't a conspiracy nut or an Alex Jones freak? You know, it's just, I'm sure you could find one. I'm sure somebody could probably find a mass shooter in the last 5 years who wasn't conservative, but seems like a fucking awful lot of them are, isn't it? And I don't know. I guess there might be, yeah, maybe it is what you're saying there. I don't know. But I don't think that they're all crazy. That's the thing. I don't think they're all crazy. I think there's just a lot of inconservative, wacky, wacky conservative Christian culture kind of predisposes people to it. You know what I mean? So, let's see. In Shoma, apparently there have been studies on the conservative libertarian psychology and how their rougher generation influences them for the worse, even against fellow white people. Ted Cruz fucks off over Texas. Um, yeah, that's true. That's true. By the way, Raph, hey man, sorry I missed your last stream that you invited me to. Sorry about that. I had some shit I had to do for work, so wasn't able to join. But if you want to do another one this weekend, hey, let me know, dude. I'm available. Um, I think I gotta end it here. Yeah, we're getting close to 1:30, and I am really, really, really hungry right now. I'm like, my stomach is like eating itself. I gotta go get some fucking lunch. So, sorry guys, we gotta end this. But Raph, I will read the rest of your comments there. So, I think what we'll do next week, let's take a look at where we're at here. We're getting close here, starting to add shadows and stuff. I have to add some texture to the ground underneath this. Um, I think where we're gonna go next week, I want to do a stream about libertarian like thought and the age of consent, because like I was saying when I was researching that, there's just so much material there, and a lot of it is very controversial, and I think would make a great stream to talk about. Because yeah, there's a reason why there's so many fucking pederasts and shit who identify as libertarians, and it's a thing that a lot of people that they don't really talk about. You know, it's sort of like a unacknowledged underbelly of libertarian philosophy that I think we should talk about that. We should expose it a little bit. So maybe that might be our stream next week, and unless if nothing really insane happens in the news or whatever, that's probably what we're going to talk about next week. So anyway, guys, thank you all so much. You guys are great. Lewis the Hedgehog, thank you. You're awesome. Sean Longram, thanks for joining. And Shoma, Raph, good to hear from you as always. Adversary Fandom 2, you're great. Dynacat, of course, you're awesome. Thank you for joining. And also, Lewis the Hedgehog, if I didn't say thank you already, thank you again for joining every week, man. You're awesome. Sorry, guys, I got to end this. I'm freaking hungry as hell, so I'm going to go ahead and just give my ending speech here. Please like and subscribe as always if you haven't already. I know it's dumb and you hear that all the time from everybody, but it actually works. You know, Thank you, and tell your friends about my stream, stuff like that. Spread it around, whatever. And if you like what I do and you want to support me, um, I have some websites here that you can check out. If you like what I do and you want to support me in a monetary way, here is my SD shop that I sell stuff on. I'm going to be putting a lot of new things up here on my SD shop pretty soon. I have lots of little sculptures and things that are going to go up here pretty soon. So if you like what I do, please consider buying a print maybe. Um, I also have a DeviantArt website. If you like my artwork and you want to see more of my artwork, you can check it out here. Plus, you can download all these things for free. So all of this stuff that you can buy physical copies of, if you just want to like download them here, here's actually one we did during the stream. Feel free to just download this stuff for free if you want. Totally cool. So let me put that also in the chat as well. Here is my webcomic. This is hawanja.com, fun for the whole stupid family. It's about ninjas and demons and ninjas fighting demons, people getting blown up, stuff like that. So you can see, come get some, blah, blah, blah. It's extremely violent because, I don't know, that's what I like drawing. Please check me out there. I also have a Patreon. If you want to give me money every month, feel free to support me. I actually do have a couple patrons. Thank you all for you guys who support me on Patreon. Really appreciate you. You're awesome. And I think that's pretty much it as far as my social media stuff goes. So, oh yeah, and then I also have my other YouTube channel, which is UCD Videos on YouTube. And this is where I do toy reviews and movie reviews, and I talk about shows, stuff like that. Been doing a lot of Masters of the Universe related stuff recently just because there's so many toys out there, and Masters of the Universe Origins are the best toys ever made. I love them. They're so freaking cool. So doing a lot of those reviews and stuff. But if you want to see me, I do the occasional gaming stream and that kind of thing. So if you want to see some non-political content, please check me out on UCD Videos. Anyway, guys, time to end this. Thank you all so much once again. Lewis the Hedgehog, Brainbug, thank you for joining also. I think I missed you the first time around. Dynacat, thank you. Genghis Vern, thank you for joining. Sean Lonergam, you're awesome. Adversary Fandom too. And of course, Nshoma. You guys are the best. I really appreciate it. And we will be back next Saturday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. See you all then. Adios, guys.